From Stone Age suburbs to studio backlots, the 1970s were obsessed with bottling the same Saturday morning lightning, the cozy, gag-a-minute family world the Flintstones built. Networks kept asking, what if we just move that formula somewhere else? Ancient Rome, a football neighborhood, a touring pop clan. Today, we count down 15 1970s cartoons that tried a little too hard to copy the Flintstones. Let's roll. The New Fred and Barney Show, 1979. Hanna-Barbera didn't need to chase the formula. They were the formula. But by 1979, the studio was convinced that simply reactivating Fred and Barney would reignite the old spark for a new generation. The New Fred and Barney Show stitched together fresh segments with earlier Stone Age routines, leaning heavily on familiar domestic gags, bowling night blunders, and neighborly irritation. The result? A nostalgia engine that felt more like a museum exhibit than a living sitcom. As a time capsule, it's revealing. The laugh track stayed. The jokes were comfort food safe. ABC paired and repackaged the cavemen with other properties, culminating in blocks like Fred and Barney Meet the Thing, and later Meet the Shmoo, crossovers that signaled brand management more than organic storytelling. The show wanted the feeling of the Flintstones without daring to evolve the suburban template beyond slightly shinier animation. Controversies were mild but telling. Critics rolled their eyes at the repetition. Parents noticed how sanitized the new bits felt compared to the sly, grown-up winks of early 60s primetime Flintstones. Standards and practices had hardened by the late 70s, so rougher edges, like overt bickering, barroom humor, or two-pointed marital spats, were sanded down. The cultural climate preferred pleasant and inoffensive, and that's what it got. Cultural impact? The series proved the Bedrock brand still sold lunchboxes, but it also demonstrated that recycling the same domestic beats without a fresh angle could make Bedrock feel oddly airless. In a decade crowded with copycats, the strange irony is this. The cartoon that launched the template briefly became its own imitator, showing how hard it was to bottle Yabba Dabba Doo twice. The Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm Show, 1971. If the Flintstones taught TV that suburban life could be animated, the Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm Show tested whether teen suburbia could keep the party going. Set years after the original, it aged up the babies into high school protagonists, then layered on band rehearsals, car hop crushes, and hall monitor mishaps. The pitch was crystal clear. Preserve the family comedy structure, just move it to lockers, Letterman jackets, and Stone Age shop class. The show's storytelling stayed stubbornly domestic, parental curfews, school dances, group projects, and the gentle chaos of young independence, right down to prehistoric gadget gags that mirrored Fred and Wilma's appliance shtick. Pebbles led a music group with Bamm-Bamm pounding prehistoric percussion. Numbers punctuated episodes much like other early 70s teen cartoons, telegraphing the era's crossover between pop singles and Saturday mornings. Controversies were light but persistent. Older fans felt the teen focus diluted the adult cleverness that once let the Flintstones double as a primetime sitcom. Meanwhile, network censors insisted on tight moral lessons, no delinquent behavior, no truly rebellious arcs, so the conflict often landed feather soft. When romance appeared, it was squeaky clean and usually resolved with a handshake ending and a wink to respect your folks. Cultural impact arrived in two ways. First, it helped cement the spin-the-family-forward tactic that cartoons would reuse for decades, take an established brand, and time-jump the kids. Second, it showed that a suburban framework could be shuffled into a high school series without losing the core. Neighborhood antics, supportive but exasperated parents, and friends solving mild crises by the credits. In short, it was Bedrock with a yearbook, proof that the Flintstones blueprint could graduate even if it didn't quite reinvent the wheel. The Brady Kids, 1972 to 1973. When Filmation animated America's most famous blended family, it didn't just borrow the Flintstones playbook, it practically underlined it. The Brady Kids stays doggedly domestic, sibling rivalries, chores that turn chaotic, neighborhood talent shows, and we have to fix this before Mom and Dad get home mini farces. Even the visual grammar, bright suburban backdrops, tidy living rooms, and commutable adventures, mirrors Bedrock's neighborhood energy, just without the caveman shtick. The twist is synergy. The live-action Brady Bunch primed audiences, and the cartoon doubled down with crossovers, Superman, Wonder Woman, a novelty that kept episodes buoyant even when the stories felt copy-pasted. The kids' pop harmonies functioned like the musical stings that teen-oriented tunes loved in the early 70s, echoing the era's belief that a catchy chorus could glue together a half hour. Controversies were mostly critical. Reviewers accused the series of being so gentle it barely registered, especially compared to the sly marital bite that once let the Flintstones charm adults. Filmation's cost-conscious animation drew the usual flack: limited motion, recycled cycles, and static frames. Censorship notes? Standard Saturday morning guardrails, firm lessons, minimal peril, and conflicts that evaporate by the tag. Yet cultural impact is undeniable. The Brady brand gave kids a mirror of everyday life: homework, sibling teamwork, and low-stakes mischief, with just enough magic pet weirdness to keep things lively. In pipeline terms, it validated the family-to-toon transmedia strategy networks would ride for years. Take a household the audience already knows and translate it into bright ink and safely packaged. Scrapes. It wasn't Bedrock, but it lived on the same cul-de-sac. The Jackson 5-5, 1971 to 1972. Rankin Bass turned Motown's hitmakers into a Saturday morning ensemble, and while the Jackson 5-5 was a music cartoon first, it borrowed liberally from Flintstone-style domesticity. Goofy home-based gags, brotherly squabbles, backstage chores, and a rotating door of neighborhood problems that could be solved within 22 minutes, and usually with a performance. The family was literal, which made its sitcom rhythms feel especially familiar. Episodes leaned into comic misunderstandings, pet antics, and the "we're late for the show" race, comfortably echoing Bedrock's retrieve, repair, repeat structure. The animation often used stylized performance sequences, a smart way to showcase the group's hits while breaking up the sitcom pacing with a pop art detour. Controversies clustered around representation and control. The group didn't voice themselves, a common practice then, which fans found odd. Some critics bristled at the clownishness of certain side characters and setups, worried it trivialized real-life artists. Standards and practices kept everything squeaky clean. Storylines avoided grown-up topics, leaned into moral wrap-ups, and foregrounded safe, smiley showbiz. Cultural impact was significant. For many kids, this was their first weekly interaction with a black superstar family framed as approachable, funny, and inventive, a counterweight to a TV landscape that too often sidelined such visibility. Musically, it proved cartoons could be vehicles for chart synergy, foreshadowing decades of animated cross-promotion. As a Flintstones echo, it traded stone wheels for tour buses, but kept the household heartbeat and the reset button that defined Bedrock's rhythms. The Osmonds, 1972. If the Jackson 5V was Motown's animated calling card, the Osmonds was its bright, smile-forward mirror, another touring family recast as a Saturday morning sitcom with homey values and tidy trouble. The template is unmistakable, a bustling household of siblings, an ever-present show to make, and weekly scrapes that end with hugs, harmonies, and a lesson. It's the Flintstones loop of problem, plan, pratfall, and peace, only with matching jumpsuits. Each episode usually parked the clan in a new locale, world tour storytelling that swapped Bedrock's quarry for international postcards. That travelogue approach widened the comedy but introduced its own pitfalls. Controversies centered on caricatured depictions of foreign settings and characters, a common animated shortcut of the time that hasn't aged gracefully. Meanwhile, network standards kept everything airbrushed. Conflict was mild, romance feather-light, and all outcomes reassuringly wholesome. As with many 70s tunes, the animation economized, repeat cycles, minimal lip sync, Yet the musical sequences did the heavy lifting, turning the show into a vehicle for brand polish. Cultural impact landed in the same lane as its Motown counterpart. It reinforced the idea that a well-known music family could operate as an all-ages sitcom, priming audiences to accept celebrity households as cartoon ensembles. For executives chasing the Flintstones effect, it looked like a win. Take the suburbs on tour, keep the family intact, and never let the tone waver from nice. But therein lies the critique. The Osmonds' endless pleasantness edged toward the friction-free blandness that sank many copycats. Without the sly adult edge that once made Fred and Wilma feel like your neighbors, the show felt like a spotless tour bus circling the same block. Proof you can imitate the structure of bedrock and still miss its spark. The Addams Family, 1973. At first glance, the Addams Family animated series might seem like the least likely Flintstones copy. After all, Charles Addams' macabre clan thrived on spooky satire. But when Hanna-Barbera got hold of them in 1973, the monsters were transplanted into something startlingly familiar. A cheery family sitcom where bizarre antics neatly wrapped up each week, complete with laugh-light adventures and problem-of-the-day storytelling. Episodes leaned on suburban-style plots. Neighbors misunderstood Gomez's enthusiasm. Wednesday's hobbies clashed with school, or Cousin It's quirks sparked misunderstandings. While the trappings were ghoulish, the rhythms were pure bedrock. A nuclear family with kooky pets, neighborhood interactions, and conflicts that reset at the credits. Even the comedy often mirrored Flintstones' gadget humor, swapping prehistoric appliances for gothic gags like self-playing organs or pet carnivorous plants. Controversies were subtle. Fans of the live-action Addams Family found the cartoon's tone watered down. What had once been a darkly satirical sitcom became a safe Saturday morning romp. Censors clamped down on the family's edge. Violence became slapstick. Sinister jokes were softened, and all scary moments were punctuated with comedy. For purists, it was a betrayal. For kids, it was simply a quirky family that reset each Saturday morning. The cultural impact is paradoxical. While short-lived, the cartoon kept the Addamses in circulation, bridging the gap between their 60s sitcom and later revivals. More importantly, it demonstrated how the Flintstones framework could bend almost any property, yes, even Gothic satire, into a domesticated sitcom machine. It was bedrock in cobwebs, proof that the formula was too tempting for executives to resist. Yogi's Gang, 1973. By the early 70s, Hanna-Barbera had built a zoo of mascots, Yogi, Quick Draw McGraw, Huckleberry Hound, and decided to band them together in Yogi's Gang, a series that, despite its traveling arc premise, functioned as a carbon copy of the Flintstones neighborhood comedy. Instead of Fred and Barney swapping quips with neighbors, Yogi and his gang held town meetings on a flying ship, solving moral dilemmas in neat little arcs. Each episode introduced a themed villain, Greedy Genie, Mr. Sloppy, or the Envy Brothers, who essentially embodied a bad habit for the gang to conquer. Structurally, though, it was classic suburban sitcom. The group faces a problem, bungles the solution, learns a tidy lesson, and wraps it all up with smiles. Just like Fred's family quarrels, the Yogi crew's conflicts were miniaturized allegories about modern society, disguised in cartoon slapstick. Controversies were rooted in its heavy-handed moralizing. Critics complained that the show became more sermon than comedy, hammering home messages about pollution, greed, or selfishness with all the subtlety of a chalkboard lesson. Censors, however, adored it. Its squeaky clean moral tone made it a safe bet for Saturday morning, even if it robbed the show of sharper wit. Cultural impact was mixed. For some children, Yogi's Gang was their introduction to environmentalism and social responsibility. For others, it was forgettable preachiness. But in copying the Flintstones template of neighborly bickering and community lessons, the show revealed how the formula could be bent toward issue of the week, storytelling. The result was noble in intention but hollow in spark, a recycled family dynamic turned airborne lecture circuit. Where's Huddles, 1970. Imagine the Flintstones, but instead of a quarry worker, the dad is a professional football player. That was the entire pitch for Where's Huddles, a short-lived Hanna-Barbera sitcom that followed Ed Huddles, his wife Marge, their 2 kids, and neighbor Bubba McCoy in a cul-de-sac that looked suspiciously like bedrock with AstroTurf. The parallels were impossible to miss. Ed and Bubba mirrored Fred and Barney's bumbling buddy dynamic, while their wives delivered the eye-rolling pragmatism of Wilma and Betty. Episodes revolved around suburban antics, preparing for the big game, wrangling the kids, borrowing lawn tools, or clashing with stuffy neighbor Claude Pertwee, a character cut from the same cloth as Mr. Slate. Even the football games were more about slapstick misunderstandings than actual sports. It was suburban family humor dressed in shoulder pads. Controversies were few but telling. Critics dismissed the series as a transparent Flintstones knockoff, and its cancellation after a single season reflected audiences' lack of appetite for another clone. The show avoided anything remotely edgy. Censors ensured wives remained devoted homemakers, husbands stayed bumbling but lovable, and every crisis wrapped up in harmony. The result was safe, predictable, and painfully derivative. Yet cultural impact lingers as a curiosity. For years, Where's Huddles symbolized Hanna-Barbera's obsession with repeating the Flintstones trick by changing only surface details. Instead of Stone Age quarries or Roman arenas, the gimmick was football, fields, but the core formula never budged. It proved you could change the uniforms, but not the fact that everyone already missed Fred and Barney. The Barkleys, 1972. In a decade filled with Family of Talking Animals cartoons, the Barkleys stood out, and not in the way producers hoped. The premise was simple: a family of dogs living suburban lives, complete with sitcom squabbles, a hard-working dad, Arnie Barkley, a homemaker mom, Agatha, and 3 kids who brought home schoolyard dilemmas. If that sounds like the Flintstones with floppy ears, that's because it was. The show even borrowed All in the Family's topicality, trying to weave in light commentary on changing gender roles, economic pressures, and generational clashes. But in the end, it stuck to the bedrock formula. Goofy dad bungles something, long-suffering mom delivers wisdom, and the kids tie everything up with a bow. The canine twist added novelty but not depth. Controversies centered on its failure to deliver real bite. For a show clearly riffing on topical sitcoms, censors clipped anything sharp, muting social satire into soft family lessons. Critics called it toothless, an ironic fate for a show about dogs. Without the Flintstones' novelty of caveman gadgets or sly winks to adult audiences, the Barkleys felt derivative and dull. Cultural impact was minimal, though the show did earn a cult following for its oddity. It later re-aired in rerun packages like Fred Flintstone and Friends, which unintentionally underlined its copycat roots. The Barkleys became a case study in how simply reskinning a suburban family with anthropomorphic characters wasn't enough. Without wit or innovation, it was just the same chew toy gnawed one time too many. The Roman Holidays, 1972. If you thought the Flintstones worked because caveman gags made modern life funny, Hanna-Barbera thought, why not ancient Rome? Enter The Roman Holidays, a series centered on Gus Holliday, his wife Lori, daughter Procotia, and pet lion Brutus. Instead of quarries, Gus worked at the Forum Construction Company. Instead of cars powered by feet, they had chariots and toga-clad traffic cops. The resemblance to bedrock was not subtle. It was the same suburban framework in sandals. Episodes relied on household plots, raising an allowance, landlord disputes, father-daughter disagreements, all cloaked in Roman settings. Just as the Flintstones had dinosaurs operating garbage disposals, the Roman Holidays featured enslaved servants used as appliances, a gag that drew some uneasy commentary even at the time. The humor strained to match the effortless Stone Age puns, but without Flintstones' warmth, it often felt like a parody of itself. Controversies emerged from its clumsy use of Roman tropes. The casual depiction of slavery as comedic servants raised eyebrows, even within a cartoonish context. Censors tolerated it, but critics questioned whether it trivialized history for shallow laughs. Combined with weak storytelling, the show only lasted one season, proving audiences weren't clamoring for toga-clad Flintstones. Still, the cultural impact is fascinating. The Roman holidays exemplified Hanna-Barbera's dogged belief that the Flintstones model could be copy-pasted into any historical period. Yet the failure underscored the magic of Bedrock. It wasn't just the costumes or gadgets, it was the chemistry of Fred, Barney, Wilma, and Betty. Swap them for togas, and the charm quickly crumbled like a Roman ruin. These are the days, 1974 to 1975. At a time when nostalgia was sweeping television, these are the days aimed to animate the early 1900s with a wholesome family sitcom lens. The Day family, Dad Charles, Mom Mary, and their children, lived in a small town filled with neighborly drama, school misadventures, and home repairs gone wrong. Sound familiar? It should. Structurally, the show could have been Bedrock with suspenders and horse-drawn wagons. Stories revolved around lessons of honesty, responsibility, and family unity, echoing the moral simplicity networks demanded by the mid-70s. Episodes tackled themes like a son getting a first job, a daughter navigating friendship troubles, or the family struggling with finances. Each plot reset neatly by the end, preserving the sitcom formula pioneered by the Flintstones and refined for safe Saturday morning viewing. Controversies arose not from content, but from tone. Critics complained it was too bland, more moral track than entertainment. Viewers accustomed to the sly wit of Bedrock or the spectacle of Scooby-Doo found its earnestness dull. Censors, however, loved it. There was nothing here to object to, which ironically dulled its cultural bite. Cultural impact is limited, but noteworthy as one of Hanna-Barbera's attempts to prove the Flintstones formula could stretch into historical Americana. It taught children sanitized lessons from the past while packaging them in a family sitcom identical in rhythm to Fred and Wilma's quarrels. Ultimately, though, it proved that simply changing the time period wasn't enough. Without spark or edge, it faded after one short season. Goober and the Ghostchasers, 1973. Though usually remembered as a Scooby-Doo clone, Goober and the Ghostchasers also leaned heavily into Flintstone-style family comedy. Goober, a klutzy ghost-hunting dog, hung out with a trio of human companions who constantly found themselves in sitcom-like tangles, blending domestic humor with supernatural hijinks. Episodes often played less like mysteries and more like neighborhood escapades, with Goober bungling his way through chores or disrupting the kids' plans. The resemblance to Bedrock came in the formula, a family unit of sorts with squabbles, teamwork, and a goofy pet serving as comic relief. The show even had frequent celebrity guest stars, including the Partridge Kids, who brought musical numbers and sitcom-style story, beats that mimicked the family-friendly rhythms Hanna-Barbera had perfected with the Flintstones. Controversies were rooted in redundancy. Critics called it a half-baked hybrid, neither spooky enough to stand on its own, nor witty enough to match the sitcoms it imitated. Censors, predictably, softened anything remotely frightening. Ghosts were more bumbling than chilling, making the stakes feather light. The cultural impact was modest. For many young viewers, it was a comforting mix of laughs and mild frights. But looking back, it's clear it functioned as another attempt to repackage the Flintstones household dynamic. A mismatched family, a comic pet, and sitcom resets, all trapped in a loop of safe hijinks. The only difference? This family happened to be chasing spirits instead of dinosaurs. Inch High, Private Eye, 1973. On paper, Inch High, Private Eye was about a detective so tiny he could sneak into any situation. In practice, it was a domestic sitcom disguised as a mystery show. Inch traveled with his niece Lori, her strongman boyfriend Gator, and their dog Braveheart, a group dynamic that functioned exactly like a sitcom family on the move. Their cases were little more than excuses for squabbles, comic misunderstandings, and we must stick together lessons, echoing Flintstones rhythms. Episodes leaned on repetitive setups. Inch bungles the job, Lori tries to manage the chaos, Gator supplies muscle, and Braveheart provides comic relief. Swap detective gadgets for Stone Age household contraptions, and you're back in Bedrock territory. It was less about mystery and more about household interplay dressed up in a trench coat. Controversies mainly came from audience fatigue. By 1973, viewers had endured a parade of Hanna-Barbera formula clones, and Inch High felt particularly stretched. Censors kept the show feather light, stripping away any real danger or menace, which left it with all the tension of a suburban squabble. Its cultural impact is small but symbolic. It proved Hanna-Barbera could repackage the sitcom family dynamic in literally any costume, even a shrinking detective. Yet, without depth or originality, it became a textbook example of how studios mistook gimmicks for innovation. Beneath the magnifying glass, it was just the Flintstones in disguise. Partridge Family 2200 AD, 1974. If the Jetsons and the Flintstones had a neon-colored baby, it would look like Partridge Family 2200 AD. This cartoon transported the famous TV band into a space-age suburb, complete with flying cars, futuristic gadgets, and neighborhood rivalries that looked suspiciously like Bedrock in orbit. The family with a band dynamic only reinforced the sitcom DNA. Sibling squabbles, Mom holding it all together, and concerts functioning like Flintstones bowling nights, a recurring comedic anchor. Episodes leaned into futuristic gags, robot neighbors, interstellar travel, and alien encounters. But structurally it was the same suburban template: problem, escalation, comic mishap, tidy resolution. The family was the same, only the backdrop had stars instead of stone wheels. Controversies emerged when critics accused Hanna-Barbera of shamelessly recycling both the Jetsons and the Flintstones, stapling the Partridge brand on top. Censors trimmed anything that smacked of real teen rebellion, ensuring the kids remained squeaky clean role models despite their rock star status. Cultural impact was modest, yet notable. It showed just how malleable the Flintstones formula was. Grafted onto pop stars, plop them in the future, and you still had a family sitcom at its core. For Hanna-Barbera, it was synergy heaven. For audiences, it was déjà vu. Once again, the moral was clear. You can put the Flintstones in space, but you can't disguise the echoes of Bedrock. Wait Till Your Father Gets Home, 1972 to 1974. Topping our list is Wait Till Your Father Gets Home, Hanna-Barbera's boldest attempt to replicate the Flintstones formula, this time pitched directly to primetime adults. Harry Boyle, the weary patriarch, anchored a suburban family with his homemaker wife Irma and their 3 children, whose generational clashes mirrored the cultural upheaval of the early 70s. It was essentially the Flintstones updated with topical commentary, shifting from stone wheels to Vietnam-era politics and counterculture debates. Episodes tackled issues like environmentalism, women's rights, and generational rebellion. Yet, despite its topical edge, it still relied on the domestic loop: dad blunders, family clashes, moral lessons, and a return to status quo. It was Bedrock with bell bottoms, proof the template could be retrofitted to any era. Controversies were sharper here than in most clones. Critics alternately praised and condemned its attempts at relevance. Some lauded its courage to nod at real issues, while others felt it trivialized them in cartoon form. Censors often stepped in, softening sharp political jabs into broad family disagreements, ensuring nothing got too biting for television. Cultural impact was significant. Though largely forgotten today, it marked Hanna-Barbera's first and only successful adult-oriented animated sitcom until The Simpsons revived the format in the late 80s. As a Flintstones imitator, it proved the formula could scale into social satire. Yet by clinging too tightly to the rhythms of Bedrock, it also showed the limits of imitation. You can change the scenery, but the bones of Fred and Wilma's suburban squabbles still show through. From football fields to outer space, from Roman arenas to touring bands, the 1970s proved that television couldn't quit the Flintstones. But as these 15 copycats reveal, lightning rarely strikes twice. Which of these forgotten clones do you remember? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.